All right. Well, welcome everyone. Thanks for stopping in. I appreciate you showing up. Today we're going to be talking about managing teams and companies in this new world we live in. So for those of you that don't know me, I'm Mark White. I am the Chief Technology Officer at a company called Southern FiberNet. We're headquartered out of Atlanta. We've got three lines of business. Our legacy lines of business are fiber plant construction and fiber ISP services to the home. In addition to that, our core technology and line of business now is a internet-based TV service, so IP-based TV service that we sell over mostly the fiber that we build out. So that's really our core business line right now. I've got a few logos of the places I've worked over the years. I started my career in the military, the Marine Corps specifically. I'm a graduate of the Marine Corps Computer Science School. Since then, I've worked at some big companies, AWS, Splunk, worked at pretty much every government agency you can dream of, as well as some educational institutions. I worked at Trinity College in Evansville, Indiana, and the University of Tennessee in Knoxville, Tennessee. So, a couple years ago, things kind of changed for us, right? The entire world changed. Everything was going along just fine. One day, people start getting sick. The next day, your companies are sending you home to work from home. And for the first time in modern history, we're trying an experiment that no one ever really fathomed. We literally sent 100 million people in the United States of America home to work remotely. It's a massive amount of people. No one could even fathom this or foresee this, whether it was the markets or the hardware manufacturers or the service providers providing internet service across the various parts of the United States. It was really a first of its kind event, and it really changed the entire business landscape of the United States, most likely, at least in my opinion, most likely permanently. So, we look at this pandemic, we look at the fact that we got sent home for 2 years to work from our homes, we look at all the struggles that we had. Was it successful? Mostly, pretty much every business that could work from home figured out a way to make it happen. And then, of course, we got to think about what we learned over those 2 years. I think the biggest lesson we learned is that you kind of have to be prepared for anything now, because nobody was prepared for that. And so where do we go from here? As all of you well know, there is a massive struggle between the workforce and business leadership right now. Business leadership wants their employees back in the offices. The workforce wants to stay at home. And so, as a leader, I'm now a CTO at a company. I have a team that works for me. I manage a lot of technical solutions. You have to balance these things in your business because the morale of your team will directly impact how your company operates going forward. So, we've got a lot of challenges ahead of us. Remote work, that's probably a permanent thing. I think at best, the executives throughout the country are probably going to end up landing on some type of hybrid work scheme. I don't ever see them forcing anyone back in the office 100% of the time at this point, because there are enough employers that will not do that will basically just steal all the talent if they do force the issue. Technical debt. So, pandemic broke out. You had school systems across the country ordering Chromebooks by the thousands. You had businesses across the country ordering Dell and HP laptops literally by the pallet load. So now, 2 years later, now we have rooms and rooms and rooms full of pallets of dying computers. We have more technical debt in this country than we've had in the last 30 years combined. It's a ridiculous amount of technical debt that we got to deal with. And in addition to that, not only do we have this technical debt, we have the added stressors of the finances of replacing those technical assets going forward. We're having to replace those Chromebooks. We're having to replace those laptops because our people, our employees, they're going to continue to work from home. During the pandemic, we saw increased salaries. I am not an economist, so I don't know why this happened, but it happened. I was working at Amazon during the pandemic, and we were hiring like crazy. We were hiring as fast as we could interview people, and we were paying them well. We saw an average of about 27% increase in salaries across the board in the technical industry over the 2 years of the pandemic, where we were almost strictly working from home. In addition to those increased salaries, we're seeing record inflation. We're seeing inflation we haven't seen since the 1970s. So what that does is you have employees making more money than ever. You have record inflation, and when you have inflation combined with high salaries, the one thing you're not going to get is a degradation of those salaries over time. Nobody's going to be taking pay cuts going forward because they can't afford to. When you're paying, $4 for a gallon of gas and your rent has increased over the last 3 years, almost double what it was in the 2019, then you can't afford to take a pay cut. Legacy mindset. This is a problem I see a lot. You have a lot of business executives out there. These guys are still living pre-pandemic. You see it on the news. Executives want their people back in the office. But the problem with that is that employees don't want to go back to the office. But these executives believe that because the pandemic's over, and obviously this isn't all executives, but there are some out there, they believe that their people should be back in the office. And that mindset is creating a massive divide between the workforce and the leadership in most companies. Internal politics. No matter where you go, you have internal politics, right? I mean, who here does not deal with internal politics at their job? And as a second time around C-level, I was a previous CIO at a college in Indiana, and now I'm a CTO at Southern FiberNet. I can candidly say our greatest risk factor is always internal politics. Every single time. That's a greater risk factor than hackers. It's a greater risk factor than finances, internal politics. We'll talk about that a little bit more later. Political and social influence on business operations. No matter what your belief on these things, the reality is now, if you run a business, you have to consider what your business looks in the outside world. If you're a beer maker and you print the wrong person on a beer can, you're going to have a bad day. If you're a big box store and you start putting the wrong type of merchandise on your shelves, your stock price might see a return on that, good or bad. Once again, I'm not here to judge. These are just things that you have to take into account when you're leading a company. Build an effective and cohesive team. So how do we do that in the time of remote work? How do we do that when we have these stressed financials, when we have limited budgets, when there's more competition for good talent than there's ever been? It's a challenging statement, and we're going to talk about that some more. So the question is, how do we fix all this? These are a lot of big questions, and the brightest minds in the world are trying to fix these. Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, Bill Gates, all these guys are looking at it. Even Bill in his retirement, he's still consulting for Microsoft. They don't know how to fix these issues, and these men, these women, they have built the most successful companies in their history of the world. And if they don't know how to fix it, how is some dumb country boy from East Tennessee supposed to fix it? Well, allow me a digression here. So, motivations, and this is my digression. Motivations, why do we give these talks at these conferences? So who else here has given a talk this week? You gave a talk? Anybody else? Why'd you give a talk? Publicity. That's a great reason to give it. Trying to build a brand, trying to get out there and make a name for yourself. That is a fantastic reason to give a talk. When I initially submitted my talk to self to come here and speak, I kind of lied to myself and said, well, this is about self. And in truth, I love this conference. I come to this conference as often as I can. I've been here many times over the last 10 years, and I want to see it succeed. Coming out of the pandemic, we've got a little bit smaller crowd than usual. Things still haven't got back on track to where they were in 2019, which, by the way, if you weren't here in 2019, best self ever. It was fantastic. And so I kind of lied to myself, and I'm like, well, I'm going to do this for self because I want to give back. And don't get me wrong, I do. I volunteer, I work, I want to talk, I want to give back, I want to make sure we're successful. But when I did a little bit of introspection, what I really come to fruition for me was the fact that I'm giving this talk for myself. Because the truth is, I don't know how to fix these problems. And you know what? Nobody else does either. If you talk to Elon Musk, if I could bring Elon Musk on this stage right now, I'd be like, how do I fix this? And if he was honest, he'd say he doesn't know because he's not been able to fix it in his company, right? One of the smartest men in the world. Same thing for Jeff Bezos. Same thing for Bill Gates. I don't care who they are. If you brought them up on this stage and say, how do you fix this? They would not have an honest and effective answer for us right now. So, how do we fix this? I honestly didn't have a clue. That's why I started this talk, because I want to learn. I want to do some research. I want to find out what's going on. How does, some dumb country boy from East Tennessee who's pretending to be a CTO fixes problems in his company? How do I build a better team? How do we become more effective? What can I do? I was overwhelmed. And you know what? I've talked to a whole bunch of CTOs and CIOs over the last 2 weeks. And you know what? They're overwhelmed too. They're like, I don't know how to fix it. You know what they end up doing? They end up working harder, mostly. A lot of these guys I talk to, they're, CTOs, CIOs of small companies, 20 to 100 employees, and what they do is they work 70-hour weeks. That's what they're doing. Because they find it easier to do work themselves than take the time and build an effective team. Because building teams can be hard, especially for people like me. So I didn't end up in this industry by chance. I was kind of drawn to it, right? Because I'm of a certain mindset. And, I don't want to judge anyone, but I have a strong feeling that a lot of you are of that certain mindset too. We're all the mechanical, curious, inquisitive types. We want to break things. We want to fix things, And so I ended up in this industry for a reason. But the other side of that is a lot of folks who end up in this industry with those skills. The thing we lack is personality skills. We don't know how to talk to people. We don't know how to interact, right? Yeah. Full blown, not even joking, I'm actually a diagnosed autistic. My son is nonverbal autistic, so we are literally autistic, not even joking. So how does an autistic guy from East Tennessee who is trained in the military talk to a bunch of guys who have college degrees and are from big cities and build an effective team when you have to work remotely all the time? I had no idea. I was overwhelmed. I was working 60 hours a week. I still am. Burning my candle at both ends, taking care of my kids at night, taking care of my disabled father. My plate's full, fellas and ladies. So, I had no idea how to fix this. So what did I have to do? I had to take a step back. I had to take a break. I was like, whoa, look, there's got to be a better way. I can't fix everything myself. I'm one man. I've got a team. I've got to leverage my team. I've got to build a better team, And my team was actually pretty fantastic. The team I inherited in my company, they are intelligent and capable and hardworking. And now that they have at least clear leadership, I'm not going to call it good, but they do have a clear idea of what they're supposed to be doing. They are quite effective. But still, I didn't know what I'm doing. So how do I fix this? How do we all fix this? All right? Well, my first recommendation, and what I've found to work the best, is we need to go back to the basics. The Vince Lombardi method. Master the fundamentals, right? So for 2 years, we've been working from home. We've been doing our own thing. We've been living in silos. Think IT pre-DevOps, right? Everything's siloed. No one's talking to each other. We're all looking at different screens. We're not working together. We're not talking the same language. Those aren't effective teams. So how do you get to that? Well, you go back to the basics. As a leader, the basic is to communicate with my team, right? Build an effective team. Get some face time. I'm not a sports guy, but I am a fan of Vince Lombardi. And the reason why I'm a fan of this guy is when he was a football coach back in the 50s and 60s, he had this idea of not necessarily perfection, but of continuing to do things until they were done right. An example in this saying is that he never took anything for granted. He literally kept things so basic as he would walk out there and tell pro football players, this is a football, right? And I know that sounds moronic even, So what am I going to do? Am I going to walk into a team full of engineers who have years of experience and say, hey, fellas, this is a switch. This is a router. I'm not going to do that. But what I did do is I walked in and I said, look, we got to get back to the basics. What are we going to do? We're going to document everything. Because that was our biggest flaw. We had no documentation. If my team had went out to lunch and we'd all died by, car wreck, or we won the lottery and just walked away, my company would have folded because there would have been nobody else to handle it. There was no documentation on how to get it up and running. And we still haven't completely fixed this issue, but we're working on it. We're working on the basics. We're working on the fundamentals. Every day, we document, then we back up, then we document, then we back up, then we document, and then we back up again. That's what we do. Yesterday, I was fortunate enough to sit in this very room, watch Susan Sons talk about stakeholder management and crisis. And her talk was so effective that I literally went back to my hotel room, got my laptop out, and I started rewriting my presentation. Because she was literally talking about almost the exact same thing I was. She just did it a lot better. So if you haven't seen that, if you have not seen that presentation, by all means, when it is posted to the web, please take the time, watch Susan's presentation. It is fantastic. It will change your life. So, as leaders of people, leaders of men and women, there's only so much we can do. I'm one man. I can't be a network engineer and a systems engineer and a CTO and a secretary. I also can't be, customer support, first tier phone calls for, our 12,000 TV subscribers. I can't do that. I'm one guy. So realize, no matter what you do, whether you're a CTO or you're a sysadmin or you're desktop support, we are all only one person, and we can only do so much things. And in the small amount of time that we have during the week, and people are like, well, you work 40 hours a week. Well, I actually work 50 to 60, but that's still a very small amount of time, right? And at the end of that week, what have I got done? I look back and I'm like, oh, well, I got these 3 things accomplished. So it took me 60 hours to accomplish 3 things? Well, no. I spent 15 hours on the phone with customers, telling them why their TV channels weren't working, right? I was communicating to the customer. So that was time I wasn't working on a router, or I wasn't working on a server, right? Or I wasn't leading my team. So remember, as individuals, there's only so much we can do, because in this industry, there is a real problem with burnout. The last conference I went to in California before the pandemic started, I learned that I wouldn't call him an acquaintance, a friend, but he was definitely a good acquaintance of mine, had committed suicide. And he did so because he was literally burnt out from the job. He worked around the clock, he worked 2 jobs, he was killing himself. And I'm that same kind of person. I retreat in my work. I love it, I enjoy it, and I get head down in it. And sometimes to the point I forget about my wife and kids, and I don't mean to, but that's just how I'm wired. I've got that autistic mindset where I find a cool problem to fix, and so I'm just head down on that problem until I get it fixed. And then I come up for air, and it's been 4 days, 3 hours of sleep a night, haven't spent time with my kids. That's not good for me, but hey, it's great for my company, right? But the point is, the first thing that you have to realize is you got to take a step back, you got to breathe. Because if you're running a team in this modern environment, you're going to be overwhelmed, you're going to be overworked, you're going to be tired, people are going to have short tempers. And so you, as a leader, you have to manage that. You have to manage the expectations, you have to manage the communication. And sometimes that means doing things that are hard. It's hard for your boss to call you on a Friday afternoon and say, hey, I really want this done today. And you have to be like, you know what, it's Friday afternoon. We don't make changes on Friday. Let's talk about it on Monday morning, right? And then you're just sitting there all week and staring at your computer waiting to see if you're getting the email of death, right? So, but that's part of being a leader of a team. Heavy is the head, right? So you have to make the hard calls. You have to push back on senior leadership when they're making the wrong moves, when they're pushing in the wrong direction. And it's hard to do. Sometimes you don't always know what's right. I mean, especially when you have senior leadership who's been in the industry 20 plus years longer than you have, and you have to take a stand on something that you would consider them an expert in. Hey, I know you've been doing this for 40 years, but I think you're wrong on this, and I want to take a stand, and we're not going to do it that way. I'll wait for my pink slip. So, next steps. What are we going to do about this? I mean, first of all, you've got to prioritize. You absolutely have to prioritize. And this is one of the things that Susan mentioned in her talk, and she explained it really well, and I'm not going to try to paraphrase what she said because I will absolutely butcher it. But that talk is fantastic. Please go watch it if you haven't. But the truth is, you have to prioritize what's going on. No two initiatives can have the same weight, because if you have two initiatives that are equally weighted, you didn't actually prioritize, you straddled the fence. Can't fence straddle in this industry, fellas and ladies. I'm so glad you came. Just letting you know. I appreciate it. So, once you prioritize, you got your priorities in order, then you have to stick to those priorities, right? That's where you really have to take your stand against senior leadership, against your teams, because they might have a different idea of where to go or how to do things. You know, you might have a systems engineer that's saying, no, we don't want to deploy these servers to that customer because we need to keep them in the rack because we don't have any spares, we don't have any extras, right? But it may be a situation where you have to just kind of hang it out there and say, you know what, no, we have to deploy these servers even if it leaves us with no extras. And that's a hard call to make sometimes. But once again, if you're the boss, if you're leading the team, those are the hard calls you have to make. And those are the ones that you're going to lose sleep over at night. You're going to be laying there. It's like, well, did I make this real call? I just sent 17 servers out to this customer, literally left us with no spares. What if one of our master caches go down? What if one of our transcoders go down? We lose all of our national channels. We have no spare servers. And guess what? Post-pandemic, you can't get servers like you used to. It doesn't work like that. Before the pandemic, I could call Dell and have pallets of servers sitting on my front step within days. Now you're like 6-8 weeks out. It's crazy. I can get used equipment now at a premium. You know, I'm paying 10 grand a pop for 7-year-old servers. You know, stuff that I used to be able to pick out of the trash. So you have to prioritize, and you have to stick to those priorities, and it's going to be some hard decisions. And it might bite you. I'm letting you know. I was in my previous CIO role, I had to make some hard decisions. And in retrospect, I still believe they were the right decisions, but they did come back to bite me. And so you just have to be prepared for that. You might fall flat on your face, and that's just part of, you know, having the job. Now, once you got your priorities straight, you need to take another step back, look at all your stakeholders. Because here you are, you're the CTO, you're the CIO, you're the CFO, you're the CEO, whatever you are. But you've got stakeholders, whether it's your bosses, the owners of your companies, if you're a publicly traded company, you have stockholders, your employees, your customers, all these people are stakeholders. So you have to look at each one of these and take a minute to understand where they're coming from. Because if you can't empathize with your stakeholders, you're not going to be effective at your job. And this is something that's very hard for me because it's really easy for me to still be the Marine. You know, I make a decision, I want to execute it. You know, consequences be damned, it's going to happen. And if you don't like it, get out of my way, right? So, I mean, still the Marine, but you can't do that, especially not in the civilian world. You've got to learn to work with your stakeholders, and you've got to understand where they're coming from. And if you don't, you're probably going to fail miserably. Because if you can't learn to visualize what they're seeing from their perspective, if you can't understand what's going on with your CEO when he calls you at 10 o'clock at night and he's like, hey, I need these servers online right now, you know, and it'd be really easy to ignore him, dismiss him, say, I'll take care of it tomorrow, I'll call him back on Monday. But as a leader of people, you have to know when to weigh those decisions. You have to know when to Pick up the phone and say, okay, I will take care of that tonight, or, hey, you know what? That's not a priority. It can wait till Monday. That's hard to do when you're talking to your boss, when you're talking to your shareholders, when you're talking to your CFO who makes sure you gets paid, you know. I mean, how do you tell that guy no? Am I going to get a paycheck next week? I got kids to feed, man. Come on. So, once you've taken the time to prioritize your initiatives, and you've taken some time to understand where your stakeholders are coming from, you're going to want to make a plan to execute all these initiatives. One of the biggest things that we lacked at the company I work at now when I got there is we had nobody managing projects. We had no PMs. We had previously had a very good PM who's still kind of a consultant to the company, a guy I still lean on heavily. He's a great guy. Went on, started his own company. He's doing really well. But there was nobody managing the projects. So we had multiple projects involving customers that had been going on for months and months that were not getting executed. They were not getting closed because nobody was managing the projects. And it seemed simple, like, oh, well, we've got to onboard these customers. How long is that going to take? Well, that's a 3-month process. Well, why has it been 6 months since we started onboarding them? What happened? What fell through the cracks? Who's not doing what they're supposed to do? You got to make a plan. And if you have the budget, I would highly recommend hiring someone to make that plan for you. I know that, you know, as an engineer, we've always had funny things to say about project managers, right? But I'll be honest with you. Good project managers are worth their weight in gold. They're irreplaceable. So if you're a leader of people, if you're running projects, if you're running a company, take the time to plan. And if you have the budget, take the time to hire somebody who's really good and better than you are at planning. Don't be scared to delegate this stuff. Once you get your plans lined up, you've got to execute. And I know that's easier said than done. Once again, I'll go back to that same scenario. If we have customers onboarding at my company, they've been onboarding for 6 months and it's supposed to be a 3-month ramp. Why is it taking so long? It's because we failed to execute. That's the bottom line. We failed. It happens. But going forward, as the leader, as the boss, you have to ensure that you, your team, and the rest of your company are executing. Once again, sometimes that will require making hard decisions and putting pressure on places you don't feel comfortable putting pressure on. I mean, who wants to call their boss, their CEO, and say, hey, this isn't getting done because you didn't do this, or you call your CFO or your CIO or whoever it is, your head engineer, hey, this isn't getting done because you failed to do this. I need it done now. And that's hard to do. That goes back to what I said earlier. You have to build a team. And team building doesn't just go down. It's not just the people that work for you. You have to consider every person you interact with, the people that work for you, the people you work for, your customers. They're really all customers. And so you have to build that team through teamwork, through customer-facing interaction. Your boss is a customer. Your employees are your customers in some way, because they need things from you. Without you executing, they can't do their job. And so you constantly have to think, what can I do to facilitate success? What can I constantly work at to make sure that my company and my employees are getting where they need to be? And that's a hard question because you don't always know. You don't always have a clear answer. And that comes to our next step. You have to communicate with people. So I worked at Amazon for 2 years. And, you know, I grew up in the country. My parents are God-fearing people, and they're like, if you don't have any nice things to say, then you probably shouldn't say anything. So I'm not going to talk about Amazon today. But I am going to say this one thing that I did learn at Amazon. You know, as an engineer type, you know, I mean, I've been doing systems administration, systems engineering, network engineering for almost 30 years now. That's quite a while. And as an engineering type, I've always had the tendency to be a head-down worker. And I bet most of you do too. You know, you find a good problem you want to work on, you find a good problem you want to solve, and you just dig in. You're rolling up the sleeves, you're getting out your 6 laptops, your 12 screens, you're like, man, I'm going to kill this tonight. 6 days later, you're still in the same clothes, hacking away at it, chip bags all over the floor, you know? But you're getting it done. You're fixing the problem. But did you tell anybody you were fixing that problem? Did you call your boss and say, hey, look, man, there's a giant problem here. I'm going to be heads down for the next 3 days working on this. Did you do that? Because I can tell you, I didn't do that. I failed. I was horrible at that. And the one thing I learned at Amazon was to be a good communicator. Call my boss. Call my customers. Call my coworkers. Tell them what's going on. You know? And that's hard to get out of your own head, especially when you're wired like me. So communicate. Then you want to communicate. And then when you're done with that, you want to communicate some more. Because there's no such thing as too much communication. And I know that sounds so stupid, simple. But if any of you all are anything like me, then you're probably failing at this a little bit too. Then again, I could be wrong. But I have a strong feeling that many of you feel this way. So, in addition to communicating to all your stakeholders, and this is something we were talking about when I walked in here earlier, get some face time with your teams. And it doesn't matter if you're a boss, if you're a systems engineer, if you're a network engineer, if you're a desktop support technician, I don't care who you are, but get some face time with your teams. All right? And I'm not saying go back to the office full time. All right? I understand everybody loves their remote work, and I'm not bashing it. I like it too. I like being at home every day with my kids. I love it, actually. I would not want to give that up. But at the same time, every other week I drag myself in the car and I drive the 3.5 hours to Atlanta, and I spend a day in the office with my team. That's a 15-hour day for me. It's a long day. But I'm telling you that one day I spend in the office with my team, we get more done than the other 4 days of that week combined. And it's because we're all in the office, we're all looking at each other, we're all looking at the same screens, we're all talking the same language. We're working together, camaraderie, teamwork, partnership. And I know these are all cliche. And it's like, oh my God, I've heard this a million times. How many motivational speakers have y'all had to sit through at your jobs? I know if you've ever worked at a big company, you've had a dozen motivational speakers come in, tell you how to build your team. You know, Tony Robbins, power of positive thinking, right? Look, I'm not into all that, but I will tell you flat out, FaceTime makes better teams, and I've seen it firsthand. And I've seen it with the company I work with now. And once again, I want to stress, I am not advocating for the abolition of remote work, all right? Remote work is good, and I want to see it stay around. And if I have any say in it, it'll stay around for my company. But at the same time, I can see firsthand the damage that remote work has done to my company and every other company I interact with. It's been hard. It's been hard. So, you know, once again, I'm not saying move back to the office full time, but make an effort, spend some time with your teams. And even if it's not working, go have a dinner, go hit some golf balls, go shoot a basketball. Whatever you're into, spend some time with your team. It will benefit you in ways that you can't even fathom. And I know this sounds, once again, so stupid simple, but it will make all the difference in the world. Just spend some time with your guys or your gals. So this last part, balance mission accomplishment with team morale. This is a hard one. When I was in the Marine Corps, one of the things that they always pressed was your mission objective, right? Achieve it at all cost. And they encouraged you to work on your troop welfare, your team morale. But it had to come second to your mission objective, always. Because obviously we were Marines. If we screwed up, bad things happen. You know, I sit behind computer screens and look at computer screens all day. So it wasn't as big a deal as if, you know, I'm a grunt out in the middle of the Afghan desert. But even then, if I screw up, I'm not paying attention. I shut down the firewall on one of my servers. Foreign hackers get in, access classified information, expose an active op. That's a bad day for people. Good people are going to get hurt. But when you work in the civilian world, you can actually put the welfare of your team, the welfare of your coworkers, the welfare of your employees, and even those you work for, you can put their welfare before the mission objective. And personally, I would encourage you to do so. Because in my personal belief, and once again, this is just my personal belief, teams that have good morale, that have good camaraderie, they are effective teams. And I have firsthand seen where poor camaraderie and poor morale has destroyed companies. I have an acquaintance that works in the medical field who recently walked out of her job because of this exact thing. Her superiors called her in for a meeting. She listened through the entire meeting without saying a word. When they were done, she walked out. She took her keys, wrote a note, dropped them on her boss's desk, and walked out the door, never to return. Now, is that a place that anybody else is going to want to work? I don't think so. I'll tell you, I wouldn't want to go to work there. So, team morale, troop welfare. It's more important than people realize, and the smallest things can tip the scale. Smallest things. And I know it sounds stupid, but seriously, hold the door open for somebody. Say good morning. Send them an email when you haven't heard from them in a few days. The smallest things can tip the scale in favor of a successful and high-performing and effective team. Now, does anyone here have any questions? Will you come up and get the microphone, please? There's a button on the side.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so you and everybody looks at the difficulties, the problems that have occurred because of COVID. What about turning around looking at the advantages that are now? Or, it's the make lemonade out of lemons type of a thing. For one thing, you've got remote teams, so you don't need office space anymore. So you can go ahead and save an awful lot on that.
If you're in a situation, so you're saying, look at the bright side of the pandemic. We can reclaim office space, okay? That's true in some cases. But let's say you're a customer-facing company, all right? You can't give up that office space. You have customers coming to town. They're paying you tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars per month. They're going to see your storefront. I mean, I've actually asked our CEO about this. And once again, anything I've said here today, I want you to know that I have a fantastic company. My boss, he's a person of like mind and like soul. We have very similar backgrounds. He's kind of a good old boy like me. Came up in the fiber construction industry. I've got a lot of respect for him. So when he talks, I listen. And I asked him, I'm like, hey, boss, are we going to get rid of this office space? I mean, we got to be paying tens of thousands of dollars a month for this, 2,000 square feet in downtown Atlanta, right off Marietta Street, right? And he's like, well, no, because we need to be able to show customers something when they come to town. And he's like, if we get rid of this office space, we may get other office space, but we need a storefront. We have to have a place to do the dog and ponies for the customers, right? So, yeah, if you have a business where you can afford to let your office space go, that's great. But that's not, viable for all of us. But yeah, I'm sure there are some good parts. And I will tell you, I think the biggest boon to the pandemic was the fact that it forced all companies into remote work. I believe that for too long in this country, we were driving a culture of work life integration with the emphasis on work, where you integrate your work into your life, but the work has to take priority. And I mean, I saw that when I was a sales engineer. I was a sales engineer for 4 or 5 different companies over 6 or 7 years, and there were times I was spending 85% of my time in the air. Literally, 85% of my time in the air. That's not work-life integration. That's just you work. You're living to work instead of working to live. And so I think one of the great things about the pandemic, as horrible as it was for various reasons, is that it forced every company in this country to take a look at remote work. So yeah, I mean, there's definitely some lemonade to that, as you were saying, right? So no, it wasn't all bad. It wasn't all bad, but we had these 2 years where we had 100 million people sent home to work, and now we're kind of at the end of that, and it's like, well, how do we function now? You know, you have the legacy executives, they're all like, we want you back in the office. You have all the workforce, and they're like, no, I'm not coming back to the office. I've been sitting at home with my kids for 2 years. I like this. I like being here when my kids get off the bus. I like being here when my kids go to bed. I like being here when my kids get out of bed, right? So people are like, no, I don't want to go back to that. They've tasted a bit of freedom, and they're going to keep it, you know? And I mean, I don't have any hard numbers on this. I looked for some studies, and I haven't found any yet, but just based on anecdotal information that I could find, I mean, it's at the point where I believe that there's a vast majority of the workforce in this country that would quit their jobs, take pay cuts, and go to other jobs just to be able to stay at home, because they have so enjoyed the work-life balance of the pandemic era. I appreciate your question.
Yeah, I think the real estate where it'd be a huge advantage would be for companies who lease by floors. And so if you've got your workforce rotating in and out of the office and home, then maybe you only need 2 floors instead of 10 floors.
Right. So the statement is that he believes that a lot of companies could benefit from the fact of reducing their footprint and basically hot bunking in offices or cubicles, however you want to do that. And, that's something that a lot of companies are doing. I can't tell you how many memos I've seen from companies that have been made public where they are now doing that. You know, nobody has a signed desk anymore. We're all going to hot bunk our desks. We have X number of desks available. This amount of this company should be in on these days, and this part of the company should be on other days, right? So that is something that's happening now, and that's actually great, because what that does is it forces a hybrid working strategy, right? It forces companies to allow you to still work from home at least half the time. So, and the polls are out. Both the workforce and the executives are starting to converge on a happy medium here. And what that's going to look like is that's going to look like a hybrid workforce. People are going to be in the office 2 to 3 days a week. They're going to be at home 2 to 3 days a week. And I think that's probably going to be more of the permanent solution going forward, which I'm a fan of. I like the hybrid workforce. I like being in the office part-time. It gives you the face time you need to build the camaraderie you need with your team, to build an effective team, but it also doesn't put you in a position where, parents aren't able to spend time with their kids, and people aren't getting burnt out by having to commute an hour every day to the office, My office is in downtown Atlanta, and my team commutes a very short distance, but depending on the traffic, it can take them anywhere from 10 minutes to an hour and a half to get there, right? Same thing for me. When I commute down to Atlanta, if there's no traffic, I can be there in under 3 hours. If I leave late and I hit traffic, I'm 5-6 hours getting to the office. So, it's one of those things where a situation like that could burn you out pretty quickly if you were doing it every day. So, done a lot of those. And, that's a whole other thing about how are the telcos and the ISPs going to continue to expand their access, right? I mean, they're starting to squeeze every inch out of the fiber that's already out there, right? And all the wireless frequencies. I mean, We currently had to go through a retrofit at my company where we had to have a lot of the equipment in our satellite receiver dishes replaced because the government took half of our frequency away that we were previously using for the last 40 years. So so that's a whole other topic that somebody smarter than me is going to have to talk about, because I am just not all into that. But it is definitely a concern for all people in the tech industry. Are we going to have enough bandwidth in all ways, RF, fiber, whatever, to continue the expansion of data that we're seeing? And that's a side effect of the pandemic and the remote work push. Now parents are at home all day with their kids, and their kids are burning through 2 terabytes of data a month in Disney movies. Man. And Comcast, Spectrum, Charter, all the legacy companies, I mean, most of their DOCSIS plants are already at capacity, right? So, yeah, that's a very good topic for another talk, but that is not one that I'm an expert in. But I appreciate you making that comment. Go right ahead. Well, if you'll say it, I'll just repeat it back so the camera gets it. Are you hiring? So your statement in question is you work for a traditional conservative nonprofit company who does not allow remote work at all, and so you're here asking, how can I encourage my company to adopt remote work? Is that correct? Okay. So this is actually more of a philosophical question than it is a technical or leadership question. And it comes down to the idea of how much you like your job. So again, you're making the statement of, do I stay here because I love the work, I love the purpose, I love the mission of the company because it is this nonprofit that aligns with your values, or do you leave and go somewhere else, get more money, remote work, better work-life balance, right? So once again, this is a philosophical question, right? So it's, how much does the mission of your company align with your personal values? Can you answer that question? So if you remember in an earlier slide, I actually had an item that said legacy mindset. Do you remember that? And so that's what you're dealing with at your company, okay? You have a traditional conservative nonprofit company. They align with a lot of people's values, so they have a consistent workforce over multiple decades, right? When you have a consistent workforce over multiple decades, what does that tell you? It means that you're doing something right, or at least in the view of the leadership there. So in their mind, there's nothing wrong because they've got people like you that have been around 23 years. Really, and you can take all the data to them that you want. You can say, hey, look, here's all the new data from the industry. If you don't have hybrid work, you're going to lose 40% of your workforce. And they're going to look at you and they're like, no, we're not. How long have you been here? 23 years? How long has she been here? 40 years? That whole team's been here 2 decades. We're not going to lose our workforce. So the truth is, you basically have no leverage. And I hate to be that way, but, that's just the way it is. The only leverage that you would have is if half your company decided, you know what, I really do want remote work or hybrid work or more money, and they walk out the door. It's your classic, economic argument, supply versus demand, right? So right now, they have an excess in supply, right? If the demand goes up, then they have to compensate for that, whether it's money or for hybrid work or whatever it is. But as long as they have an excess supply of human assets, then they're not going to change. And from a leadership perspective, I don't know, absolutely. If I was talking to your CEO today and he's like, so do you think I should adopt remote work or hybrid work? I'd be like, yes, I absolutely do. I think, and it has nothing to do with your company per se, but more to do with the happiness of your employees. There has to be something said for the happiness of your employees. However, if you can maintain your status quo and not lose your employees, they're not leaving, they're not going anywhere, then what motivation do you have to change what you're doing knowing that you're going to take at least the minimal productivity hit? So the short answer is, if you want hybrid work or remote work or more money, you need to go back to your company and you need to organize and you need to, decide how you're going to handle that. But that's the only way you're going to get that, is you got to create leverage for yourself. And I hate to use those terms because it sounds like I'm telling you to go back and manipulate your company. I am not saying that. But that is the only way you're going to create leverage. You're very welcome. Oh, So, to paraphrase your statement, your company was doing remote work before the pandemic. It was a huge boon to your hiring process, and it enabled you to compete with much larger companies because you would allow potential candidates to live where they wanted to live and work for your company, correct? All right, so I'm just repeating that so the folks on the video can hear it. I appreciate your comment. You had a question? So the question is, have there been any practices with documentation or project management software that I found? So one of the first things I did when I went into my company is we were already using Jira Atlassian, their cloud, and I was like, why aren't we fully using the Atlassian cloud, because I mean, it's fantastic. I've used it at every job I had, and they're like, well, we just don't really know what it does. And I'm like, oh, all the documentation we had was in like a 10-year-old SharePoint site that wasn't maintained, and and it was like, it was in the SharePoint cloud, but still, it was like, it looked like it was from 1995, looked like a GeoCities website. And so I'm like, okay, we're not doing that anymore. Nobody's keeping it up. Nobody's using it. It's not streamlined. So the first thing I did, I signed us up for Confluence. Now I have my team documenting everything in Confluence, all right? We built out pages within Confluence for every one of our customers. We put contacts, we put phone numbers, we put emails. We put their channel packages on there so we know exactly what channel packages they go. So if I have to be on call, and yes, as a CTO, I do an on-call rotation because we're a very small team and I don't want to burn my guys out. So I take an on-call rotation. So if I'm on call and I have a customer put in a trouble ticket that says, hey, this channel's out, I can go look at the page, verify that that channel's in their channel package before I start going to look at, satellites and IRDs and switches and routers and find out why their channels aren't working. Because we've literally had customers call and say, hey, this channel's not working. And it's like, oh, well, that channel's not in your channel package. So if you want the channel to work, you got to get a different channel package. But Confluence, I love the Atlassian cloud. I have no affiliation with them whatsoever, but I've used it at least 6 jobs over the last 12 years, and it's fantastic. So we use Jira for trouble ticketing and project management. They've got a new platform called Atlas, which I'm just getting into. I don't know much about it. It looks very cool for like external project management. The Confluence documentation is fantastic. In fact, we were talking about the stress of the labor market earlier. One of the things that we did is we had a young man that works for me, part-time guy, doesn't have a technical background, but was a friend of one of my employees. They brought him in to work for us. So I gave the guy a full-time job instead of part-time. Like, you want to work for us? Outstanding. You can work full-time for us. And so what I did, I made him full-time. I put him in the on-call rotation, even though he's not a technical guy. He'll learn. And then what I said is, I'm like, hey, I think this process fits your skill set and your personality. I want you to take this on. So what I did is I took this person who is a non-technical person, and I made him my Confluence and Jira administrator. And I told him, take the time, go out there on their website, do the free training, go through it, do it on work time. Learn this product, learn this process. I want you to be my Confluence and Jira administrator. And here's the other part of building teams is when I work with my guys, is I tell them, I just had this conversation with them the other day. I'm like, what are you doing in 3 years? What's your next job going to be? Because there's no guarantee your company is going to be here in 3 years. I mean, I'd love to see our company be there. I'd love to see the team still be together. But there's always the chance of you go to work one day and there's chains on the door. And I've literally had that happen to me during the mortgage meltdown of 2007, 2008. Went to work, chains on the door, no place to work, don't get a paycheck anymore. What I want to do now? So, and I asked him, I'm like, so what's your next job? What are you doing? So I took this young man, I put him on a job he never did, I put him in my own car rotation, I had him do the Jira and Confluence training from Atlassian during work time, and I'm going to turn him into a Jira Confluence administrator. And you know what? When he's ready to move on, he's going to have marketable skills. Hopefully he stays around and he does a good job for us, right? But, it's always the old thing. It's like, what if we train our guys and they leave? And they leave. And it's like, well, what if you don't train them and they stay? Then you're really in trouble, right? It's like, so take the time, spend time with your people, train them, make them better, ask them what their next job's going to be. Say, hey, where are you going to be in 5 years? I mean, in 5 years, if these guys are here, I'm firing all 3 of them. My support team, they're fired. In 5 years, they're all gone. And it's not because I don't like them. The guys, they're phenomenal. They're great. I'm blessed to have them. They are one of the best teams I've ever worked with. But I want better for them because I don't want to, pigeonhole them into doing support for the rest of their life, answering customer trouble tickets. They can do more. I've got a young man who works for me. He's just getting into the tech industry. The dude is a Linux whiz. He's going to be great. In another 18 months, he's probably going to surpass me. I've been doing this for almost 30 years. I mean, the guy's phenomenal. But I'm asking him, I'm like,